Welcome to the Plants in Jars Wall of Shame. Am I in focus? Yes. This is what happens when bacteria, fungi, or other microorganisms proliferate in the tissue culture media, and it ultimately leads to the death of your tissue culture plants. But don't despair, because contamination is preventable, and today I want to show you 4 tips for doing sterile technique inside of a still air box. Don't delete. This is a message of bad luck. Join the Plants in Jars Discord server or you will be cursed with 10 years of contamination. If you ignore this message, you will have contaminated cultures forever. Wow, I guess I better join the Plants in Jars Discord server. Welcome to Sterile Technique 101. Like I said before, we're going to be using a still air box. I have one. A big one actually, just off screen. Before we can do that, I want to talk about setting ourselves up for success by controlling our environment. Our houses are really dirty. I would recommend starting your still air box process by sequestering any loose animals. If your dogs or cats refuse to wear proper PPE during the tissue culture procedure, then cut them out of your life for good, or just temporarily by moving them to another room. The entire work surface gets sprayed down with 70% ethanol or isopropyl. I'm using isopropyl, I think. Once you've prepared your workstation and successfully detained all the non-Homo sapiens, we are ready to bust out the still air box. I spray the outside and the inside of the box down with that 70% isopropyl, and instead of wiping it down, I just let that 70% alcohol sit on the box so it can properly disinfect, and I leave it sitting for about 10 to 20 minutes before actually starting the tissue culture process so that all those annoying microorganisms have time to meet their fate. If you're going to be using forceps or a tray to do the actual tissue culture work on, the proper way to set that up would be to sterilize it in a pressure cooker, much like the one shown in my arms. And to sterilize stuff, you want to do it for 15 minutes at 15 psi. A lot of people ask me, can I use an Instapot? I don't know. Does an Instapot get up to 15 psi? If it does, then yes. For today's subculturing demonstration, I'm going to be subculturing Begonia pavovina. Before anything actually goes into the still air box, you're going to want to spray it with that 70% isopropyl. Avoid sticking your entire head into the still air box. I also placed a container of 70% ethanol inside of the still air box, which I'm going to store my forceps in when I'm not holding them. And I also sprayed this container of alcohol with more alcohol before it goes into the box. Here's a diagram labeling everything that I have inside of our still air box for the subculture process. I'll also label what has been autoclaved prior to going into the box, so you're aware. Oh, and also leave the autoclave tools inside of the aluminum foil until you're actually ready to use them. So before we stick our hands into the still air box, I'm going to spray my hands and also my arms with the 70% alcohol. So I'm gonna stick my hands in here. The first tip when we're working inside of the still air box is that you don't want to put your hands over top the sterile field. Because I'm going to be working on this tray, cutting up these plants to put into this rooting media, once the foil is off of this tray, I don't want to put anything over top of this tray. Imagine there's a beam of light coming out of the tray, and if you put your hand over it, you get your fingers chopped off. So I'm going to open what I have in the foil to get set up here. The forceps are in this foil, and until I'm ready to use my forceps, I'm just gonna leave them sitting in that 70% alcohol. And since I'm not wanting to put stuff over top of this tray that I'm gonna be working on that is completely sterile, I push it to the back of the still air box just so I don't accidentally put something over it. So I'm going to take out one of my sets of forceps. Everything in here is sterile. It needs to stay sterile once it goes into the new media. So I'm going to take this out. So again, this is getting discarded, so it just goes to the side. And then as I'm moving the forceps to my left hand, I'm going to be careful not to go over my sterile surface like we talked about. And then I'm going to just kind of try to separate some of these plants apart. So So I have a plant here, another plant here, and then a couple big ones here, and I'll try to separate them. There we go, there's another one. I'm gonna put one of the sets of 4 steps down, transfer this one to my other hand, which brings us to tip 2 and tip 3. Tip number 2 is to avoid leaving the containers open for too long, and also do not put the lids down ever of a sterile container. We want to keep the lid in our non-dominant hand, which for me, because I'm a normal person and not a lefty freak, is my non-dominant hand.
What the heck?
I'm gonna grab the first chunk and I'm gonna lift up the container. I'm gonna leave the lid a little bit over the container and I'm gonna put that plant right in that fresh media and then immediately close it. And you'll notice I didn't put that lid down the whole time, and I only had it open for as long as I needed to have it open, which was ideally very short. I'm gonna repeat that process for the rest of the plants. My 4th and final tip is that you really wanna work as fast as you possibly can, but avoid moving your hands too quickly inside of the still air box, because if you move your hands too quickly, you're just gonna create, I don't wanna call it wind, but you're gonna start moving the air around, and that is the opposite of what we wanna do. So that's all the ones I'm gonna do. I got 4 containers of little baby plants here. So yeah, that completes the tutorial. Peace. Thank you guys so much for watching, and thank you to my parents for letting me film in your apartment. They're not home right now, so they don't know that I did this yet, but if you're watching, hi Mom, bye.